Everyone, good morning. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. Also want to thank Greg and Heidi for the warm introduction and David for helping to make this happen. Thank you so much. The policy that we put out, the More Than a Handshake policy, I remember when we were trying to come up with a name for it. We were looking around saying we need to do much more for our veterans. I've met dozens, maybe even hundreds of veterans around the country who talk about how when they come back, it's not just that employers aren't looking to lend you a hand. Employers are actually looking for a reason to say no, because many of them look up and say, hey, if you're a veteran, then you might end up providing more risks than rewards. And when I heard that from a veteran's mouth, I said, no way, but it rang true to me. Because I have run organizations, I've run businesses, and when you run a business or organization, you're always just looking out for the bottom line. If there's a person that comes to you and they evoke a degree of service or sympathy, but you think that you'd be taking a chance on that person, most of the time you choose not to take a chance on that person. And that's the situation that many, many veterans have found themselves in. And it's a symptom of a much larger disease in this country, which is that today everything revolves around the almighty dollar. And we talk about things, but we don't invest the proper resources. We invest $650 billion a year that we know about in the military-industrial complex, but we know far too little of that actually goes to veterans after you return home. And that's not the way you run a country or organization, in my opinion. To me, it starts when someone joins the military, and then it ends the day they die. It doesn't end the day they leave the military. But our country right now is built so much around the bottom line that after you leave service, they'll look for ways to nickel and dime you in any way they can. And there's this false sense that we do not have enough to go around in this country. It's the biggest lie in American life. I'm a math guy. I think I've got a lapel pin that says so. So math's an acronym for Make America Think Harder. We have to start trying to solve the real problems on the ground that are making us miserable, that are helping lead veterans to, unfortunately, some of the problems that Heidi was describing all too often, because our economy is not built around making us stronger, healthier, finding fulfilling paths forward. It's built around the bottom line in every community around this country. Here in Iowa, this is my 23rd time here in Iowa, but who's counting? The first time I came, there was not a big bus. There weren't these cameras. It was me and a very hardcore team. Maybe some of you can relate to that from your service. I'm not a politician, I'm a parent and a patriot. I saw what was going on around the country, and I said, we really can do much, much better. We need to rewrite the rules of our society and economy to work for us, to work for the people of this country. And unfortunately, DC has lost the thread. DC does not succeed or fail based upon our success and failure. It succeeds no matter what. How many of you knew that Washington, DC is now the richest metro area in the United States? What do they produce? Bad decisions, lack of accountability. No, I mean, people in service, this is like the opposite of what you stand for, you know? And then what do? They say, like, frankly, like when I opened this, I said, thank you for your service. If I'm you, I'm sick of hearing that. I'm just like, look, you can say thank you for my service till I'm blue in the face, but if I'm going home to a community that's falling apart, an economy that does not have meaningful paths forward, to a health system that does not serve my needs, there's a massive waiting list, I have to drive 90 miles to get there, the mental health resources are woefully inadequate, the drugs that I want aren't on an approved list, or in some cases maybe they're considered illegal, even though that's stupid. Like that, those are the things that matter. It's like the thank you is immaterial. As someone who's led organizations, there are three things you can do with people. Number one, you do nothing, they leave you. Number two, you tell them how great they are. That works for a little while, and then eventually they leave you. Number three, you compensate them properly, give them raises, and try and solve their problems, and then they'll stay with you forever. Right now, unfortunately, to me, veterans are in the second camp, where we tell you how much we owe you, but we don't actually fulfill that debt. We don't actually express that gratitude in the ways that would matter by solving your problems, trying to improve your lives, and fulfilling the obligation that we incurred the day you signed up, the day you enlisted. And it didn't end when you de-enlisted. It ends when you expire, in my mind. This is true particularly for veterans because of the debt we all owe you. But to me, this isn't just for veterans. This is for human beings, really. We're the richest, most advanced economy in the history of the world, $21 trillion and counting. Do you all remember voting for the $4 trillion bailout of Wall Street?
No.
No, none of us voted for that. Do you remember anyone complaining where they're going to get the money? No. But I know when you go and talk to people at the VA about various things, they'll talk about the money an awful lot. They'll be like, hey, what are the resources for that? How come this society found the $4 trillion for Wall Street, but they can't find a very, very small fraction of that for our people? That is what we must change. I was driven to this race by a spirit of service. Certainly I would never say that it rises to the level of risking my life overseas the way many of you have. But I was so shaken by the financial crisis that we bailed out the banks to $4 trillion. The complete absence of leadership and accountability. Do you remember any of the leaders of the Wall Street Bank stepping up and saying, hey, this happened on my watch, I'm accountable? No, not a one. They were getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars, and somehow they looked up and said, hey, who could have known? And you look at that say, this is like the worst example of leadership. Like, many of these people should have gone to jail. And I was so shocked by this, I quit my job and I started a nonprofit that Greg mentioned that helped train young people to grow businesses in places like Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, Birmingham, New Orleans. This was my spirit of service. Quit my job, told my wife, hey, I'm gonna go try and create thousands of jobs around the country. Succeeded in that. And then realized that the changes were much, much bigger. The changes were much more monumental than my organization was ever going to address. And that's when I decided to run for president, to say, look, we need to actually make things work. If you're here this morning, you might have heard about my flagship proposal of a dividend of $1,000 a month for every American, starting at age 18 until the day you die. And that seems very dramatic, but this is actually a very deep American idea that Thomas Paine championed at the founding of the country, called it the Citizens' Dividend. Martin Luther King was fighting for it when he was assassinated in 1968. And today, people like Elon Musk and others support it because they see that technology is transforming our economy in fundamental ways. So $1,000 a month would go a very, very long way in helping veterans help themselves. It would go a very long way in helping communities right here in Davenport and Iowa actually grow and be in position to hire more people instead of getting depleted, which right now they are getting depleted. How many of you have noticed stores closing around where you live? Why are those stores closing?
Amazon.
Amazon's soaking up $20 billion in business every year. How much did Amazon pay in taxes last year? Zero. That is the math. A real spirit of service drives that math, right? They're looking around being like, how much do we owe America? Zero. Like, how much are we gonna make this year? Tens of billions. How much are we gonna make off of our data? Tens of billions. How much are we gonna invest in artificial intelligence that's gonna kick many more Americans to the curb? Tens of billions. This is the math that is destroying us. And it is up to the people here in Iowa to help rewrite the rules. And it only happens here in Iowa. That's why I love being here. That's why I've been here 23 times. Because you all have the power to shape the future of this country, fundamentally. No one else does. It's only Iowa. Most of the rest of the country looks up and they see the giant government pipes clogged with money, millions of dollars of lobbyist cash, and they say there is nothing I can do about it. They are correct. There is nothing they can do about it. They're being fed the same line, saying like, hey, your vote matters. Generally speaking, most Americans' votes don't matter. But Iowans' votes do matter to the level that you all can flush the pipes. Only you can do this. This is the mission. This is my mission. That's why I'm running for president. I'm here to learn from you all to figure out how we can better solve your problems, but also to get your help in taking this message to the rest of the country and rewrite the rules of this society so it actually works for you, for me, for our children, and we can actually look our kids in the eyes and say that we're going to leave a country we're proud of for them. So thank you very much for being here today and for your service, and I'd love to hear from each of you what we can do to help. Thank you so much.
Sure, sir. Let me bring you the mic. Why not?
My question is, I turn my TV on and I see disabled veterans begging for money. But I also see that the government gave $40 billion to Boeing to build planes. What is that about?
What is that about? What's your name, sir?
Tyrone Orr.
So Tyrone, I talked about the $650 billion that we're spending on Boeing and maintaining the military-industrial complex, and not enough that's going to disabled vets who are just scraping by and are struggling day to day. So to me, those priorities are out of whack. If you can't serve your people, everything else ends up being secondary, in my opinion. And that's someone who's led an organization, like you have the numbers and the people, you always prioritize the people. So to me, you should save a bit of the $40 billion, put it aside. And the fact is, we know that you don't need $40 billion to take care of disabled vets in this country. $40 billion is a lot of money.
Is that all?
I mean, you could take a fraction of that and do a world of good for disabled veterans, make sure there's a roof over every head, make sure that they have access to services and drugs that would help them. So I think he got a sense of it because I hinted at it, but I'm for legalizing marijuana nationwide. And I became convinced of that in part through conversations with military veterans who say that this is a better way of managing my pain than the other drugs that are available, and I find it safer and more helpful. And I looking at this veteran in the eye and be like, well, shoot, like, that's pretty compelling. Like, you know, what's the counter argument? And the counter arguments are pretty flimsy. It's legal in some certain parts of the country already. So I said we should definitely legalize marijuana, but we need to do much, much more for disabled vets. You should turn on the TV and see a different picture. Again, the math is all wrong in DC because they're all bought and paid for, frankly. The disabled vet can't afford a lobbyist, but Boeing can.
That answered my question.
Mr. Yan, David Woods. Two things I want to ask you about. For about 18 years, I was working for the vets, VSO. We've had quite a few veterans who have committed suicide because of the, as you mentioned, the marijuana being illegal. And I think that would have helped a lot of our veterans who have committed suicide. I know of a few of them myself. And what can we do for that? Second thing is that we were talking to a gentleman earlier. He is a Category 8 for the VA. In other words, you're on a waiting list. And I always told people for years, you might as well write your name on a roll of toilet paper because it's going to be that long of a wait,
Right.
and then flush it down the drain. When a veteran has served his country and has gotten that honorable discharge, why isn't he entitled to medical care by the United States for his service instead of having to wait? Thank you.
Good question. Good question.
Thank you, David. So to the first, we have to do everything we can to address the suicide rate epidemic among veterans. I will take it a step further and say it's not just veterans, where suicides are now at record highs in the United States across the entire country, to the point that our overall life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years, the first time that's happened in 100 years. Last time it happened was the Spanish flu of 1918, a global pandemic that killed millions. So to the extent that we have a mental health crisis in this country, it's certainly more prevalent among veterans by a very, very high level, but it's not just veterans. I mean, our country's sick. We have record high levels of stress and anxiety and depression across the board. How many of you all have children? And you know the mental health crisis extends to the next generation. Oh, is that your? Yeah, this is oh wow, she's a little young to be anything but happy. So I've got 2 boys, 7 and 4, and I've been looking at what lies. I mean, I have friends who are children are older, but we're seeing record high levels of anxiety and depression among teenagers and teenage girls in particular, and it's coincident with, frankly, technology, like in many cases. So legalizing marijuana, I agree with you, would help many, many people, and we can make that happen immediately. I'm happy to say that at this point, the American people are more or less in agreement that legalization of marijuana is overdue. And then to your question about why the heck the waiting list is so long and people aren't entitled to care, and I've talked to veterans who again have to drive across state lines or drive for miles and miles, it's because we don't have the proper resource in place at the VA to ensure that you have a reasonable wait time. And the accountability for getting through patients in like a reasonable time frame, the accountability is zero. Like if they keep you on the waiting list forever, does anyone lose their job? Does anyone get docked any pay? Does anyone get a reprimand? No. And it's like they just sit there and we're like, yeah, the waiting list is, years long. That's just the way it is. Wheel just keeps on turning. Everyone gets paid. So what you want to do is you want to put more resources in place at the VA and say, look, whatever we're doing right now is insufficient to meet the needs of the veteran population. And then number two, you'd want some kind of real accountability. And we all know how the world works. It's like if those people got paid based upon like seeing the person within a reasonable time frame, they'd make sure they saw the person. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's just like, so you need to have some degree of measurement and accountability in place. And then if you're a veteran who's ill-served by the VA, you actually need like a place you can go that's not the VA to actually lodge some sort of complaint. Because you can't complain to the person who's causing the problem. They're not going to do anything about it. You need a separate place to go, essentially like an ombudsman or someone independent to actually follow up on complaints and see if they can speed it up. But that story breaks my heart because that person, as soon as they say, look, I need to be seen, they should be waiting a reasonable amount of time and no more. Sir, I'll give you the mic.
Yes, Mark Braverman. And Mr. Yang, I'd like you to explain why Congress is able to pass a bill that gives indefinite spending for first responders with 9/11, but when it comes to veterans and Agent Orange and other diseases, that they have to fight to try to get money, and there is no indefinite spending for that without a massive fight.
Thank you, Heidi.
You know the answer to this question. It's media and politics. Is that if you were a legislator who stood in the way of having resources spent on first responders to 9/11, then there's going to be a media firestorm at your office the next day. People are going to have a mic in your face and say, what, are you against firemen and police officers? Are you pro Al-Qaeda? Whatever like the most ridiculous argument would be. And then no legislator wants to step in front of that firing line. But then if you were to say, hey, what about veterans who served in a conflict X years ago that's not front and center and is not as politically sensitive, then they'll say, like, I'm not going to have any cameras in my face, no one's going to be bothering me. Even though morally, we all know they're the exact same thing. If you were a soldier and you were sickened by a chemical substance in a foreign conflict years or decades ago, that is morally the exact same thing as if you were near the World Trade Center and then were made sick by substances there. If anything, the soldier has a more compelling argument because the soldier often chose to go and fight for the country and then incurred this sickness or condition, whereas the first responder, it was their job, they were in New York and they're heroes for heading towards the blast, not away. But morally, they're very, very much identical. And I would say that I was in Manhattan during 9/11. I was a younger man then. I can't believe people were born today that weren't alive during 9/11. I mean, she obviously should not know what 9/11 is for a little while.
Yeah, veterans.
Yes.
You could be serving in Afghanistan. Not even be born on 9/11 and be serving in Afghanistan.
Yeah, time has flown. But I remember being there that day and then seeing the second plane hit the towers, and the first plane I didn't see, and the second plane. And then everyone just started walking north, like away from the blast. So I certainly have a lot of admiration for people who went the other direction, because I was part of like the massive crowds just sort of walking. We were like ants. It was like the island of Manhattan was like a set of ants, and there was like a, you know, like a fire, like the sound of this, all the ants just started marching north. And we didn't say a word to each other. We were just sort of like milling all in the same direction. But the same is true though for obviously the soldiers who went into harm's way in conflicts that would subject them to something like Agent Orange. If we were doing it for the first responders, we should do it for the veterans. And again, one of the big principles I have is, I know we have the money. Like, we have so much money. I've been to the pillars of wealth in our society, and I have seen things that beggar the imagination. And then if someone says with a straight face, we don't have money for veterans, it's bullshit, honestly. We have to stop it.
Thomas Schlew. I was in Iraq, and that's where my service was for the Army. And I came back home with PTSD, and the first thing they tried to do is, oh, here's a pill, here's this, and you know, and I tried a rainbow of substances under the sun, and I found that messing with my brain chemistry the way they were with all those chemicals wasn't helping. So that's why I'm interested in your policy about the reverse boot camp and like trying to find jobs and stuff like that, because like you said, I go out and I apply, and you know, I get to the interview, and so they worry about, oh, is he going to go off the deep end if he's here at work? And so would I still have access to that reverse boot camp and those policies, even though it's been a couple years since I've been out?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. You are not alone on either front, having PTSD and then having employers be concerned about that during the interview process. You would 100% have access to a reverse boot camp even a couple of years after the fact. One of the things that I was shocked by was that military credentials don't translate into the civilian workforce, even though you might have done a task for years at a much higher level than a civilian certification, but then you come back and all of a sudden, like, none of them count. So we have to have the credentials translate. We have to have a reverse boot camp so that if you are looking to develop your skills in some way, or even your marketability, then you have resources to do so. And we have to try and provide some sort of incentives to employers to say, look, like hiring a veteran is a bottom line positive decision, yes, but then there are also certain other incentives we can put in place. Because, like it or not, most of these organizations do revolve around the bottom line. And if we got more veterans into these organizations and they could see, hey, these people perform great, then that would be the ideal. And there are ways that we can provide incentives to make that an easier decision for them. For example, let's say hypothetically, we'll pay the veteran's salary for the first 6 months on the job. It's essentially try it before you buy it for an employer. How many employers might take up on that? And then after 6 months, they're like, you're great. And then it just keeps on going. If you can de-risk it for employers, then all of a sudden, it becomes a different kind of conversation. Also on the PTSD front and the drugs front, my brother is a psychology professor. I think we have gone a bit overboard with medicating many people's conditions. To me, and when you sit down with the physician who prescribes the drug, you know what the conversation is. What does he always say, or she? This has worked for some of my patients. You know, it's really imprecise. They're like, try this. And then how many months is it before you can tell if it quote unquote works?
3, 4.
Several, probably. And then you come back around and being like, how did it work? And then how did the conversation go? It's like, it sort of helped, but then there are these other things I really don't like about it. And then what's the next move?
Let it go.
maybe you should try this one instead. and so it's not just veterans, again, like we all experience this. The fact is a lot of these drugs and antidepressants have variable effects on different individuals. And you think a medical doctor somehow has it down to a science. They generally do not. Happily, at least some of them are like honest about it. They're like, well, you know, this drug will interact with different people in different ways. To me, this should not be the first resort. My brother's a clinical psychologist, and there are a lot of things you can do with cognitive behavioral therapy and just counseling generally that can help you develop a tool set. Like someone in my family has anxiety attacks, as an example. Now it's possible some physician could be like, here's a drug for that. But then that person actually ended up going through counseling and then developing a mental tool set to use when the anxiety attack was coming, and then now they can handle it. It's not like gone, but they can handle it. That's a superior approach than saying, here's a medication, maybe will help with your anxiety. So we need to try and invest in those resources so that there are more professionals at hand who will do something that's not the quick fix. And it's not even a fix, as we know. Like, nothing's a quick fix, really. But the quick fix in this context is drugs. There are actually other solutions that can help in some cases. Though if you do find a drug that works for you, fantastic. We should make sure you get that drug without breaking the bank. If that drug happens to be marijuana, also fantastic. But if there are ways we can help you that don't involve ingesting a drug, that to me should be the first move. Sir. Thanks, Heidi. Appreciate it.
Good morning, I'm Brian Snook. Thank you for coming out, Mr. Yang. I agree wholeheartedly with you on that the fact that corporations and the wealthiest individuals in this country aren't paying their fair share. I was wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail on your proposal for rectifying this issue.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So I said earlier that Amazon pays zero in taxes. How many of you knew that before I said it? So those of you who didn't know that, and you're like, how is it conceivable that $1 trillion tech company pays zero in taxes? It is not just them. All of the biggest multinationals manage to get their tax burden down to zero or close to zero in many cases, and it's staggering. I mean, how many of us paid zero in taxes? Like, we all pay much, much higher levels, even though we're not making tens of billions of dollars, and the rest of it. And they play a bunch of games. I'm actually enough of that world where I actually know what the games they're playing are. So if you're an entrepreneur, you look around the world and say, okay, how are other countries keeping the Amazons of the world from paying zero in taxes? And every other advanced economy has adopted something called a value-added tax that then takes a toll of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, and then takes that money, and in my case, puts it in the hands of everyday Americans at $1,000 a month. We should try and move the tax rates up and become more progressive. But one of the things I say, it's like, remember the Willie Sutton saying, like, why did I rob the banks? Because that's where the money was? Mm-hmm. It's the same here. It's like, where's the money? It's getting spirited up to the Amazons of the world. It's not with the town dentist, let's put it that way. And so you have to go to where the money is flowing, and the best way to do it is to have this value-added tax that then gives us a toll on every sale. Because even if you were to move the corporate tax rate up in this country to a higher level, which I might recommend, the games they're playing make it seem like they have zero profitability. So if I ratcheted up the corporate tax rate from its current level, let's call it 20%, to 30%, like 30% of zero is still zero. Like they'll just say, hey, it all went through Ireland, or we like paid our executives a lot, or I invested a ton in this new business, because they really detest paying taxes. They're very, very good at avoiding it. But every other advanced economy has set up this toll, and the toll is impossible to game your way out of. Like, you can't pretend you didn't sell something. And so when you sell, you pay the toll. It would generate hundreds of billions of dollars very, very quickly from the richest businesses, primarily. So that's my plan. We should make the tax rates more progressive too, but other countries have solved this problem most powerfully with this value-added tax layer. This is one reason why I'm not for a wealth tax that some of the other candidates have championed. Not because I'm not for the spirit of a wealth tax, because the spirit of a wealth tax I'm more or less fine with. But in practice, when other countries have put in a wealth tax, the wealthy have played ridiculous games to wriggle out of it. Literally, they've just gotten a divorce. It's like if you're a married couple and you're worth 50 million and that's where the wealth tax is, you get a divorce and like, hey, now there are two of us, we're 25 million. Like this ridiculous stuff starts happening. And one of the jokes I told, it's like, do you think the wealthy in America are more eager to pay taxes than the wealthy in Denmark, Sweden, Germany, France, and every other country that's tried this and then ended up repealing it because the rich just did ridiculous things? Rich people just love their money so much that they'll just do, like they'll move heaven and earth to freaking hang out and that stuff. So if you're gonna get it from them or their companies in a real way, you have to make it so they don't have a choice, frankly. So that's my plan. Oh, it's too bad. I love this group.
Gentleman wants to ask a question.
Sure.
Oh, I was just, kind of what you're talking about there, I can talk loud enough. The $1,000 a month, anytime it's mentioned, I mean, to explain it a little bit better to us, just as I was walking in there today, I was on the phone, the guy, where are you going? Oh, I'm going in to see Andrew Yang. Oh, he's the guy that wants to give everybody $1,000 a month, and that's the end of the conversation. So, you know, tell us a little bit about that.
I'd love to. I know that that is the idea I'm most powerfully associated with, which has its pluses and minuses. For some people, it's very powerful and cuts through the noise. For other people, it seems like a gimmick. I understand it. We're in the midst of the most extreme winner-take-all economy in the history of our country. Levels of inequality that, if you saw just how dramatic it was, it's sickening, honestly. Like I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen, and I came away and I said, we have to do something about this. Now, there are different ways you can do something about it, but the most effective direct way is just to put money into our hands. It would make us stronger, healthier, less stressed out, mentally healthier, would improve our relationships, would improve our outlook and optimism and trust. And it even improves kids' personalities, especially the little girl. I mean, her personality is delightful already. But it makes the kids who grow up in these households more conscientious and agreeable. And again, this is not my idea, it's not a new idea. Thomas Paine, Martin Luther King, Milton Friedman, 1,000 economists have championed it. And my wife and I talked about this, where she said if this was mainstream in the 60s and it passed the US House of Representatives twice in 1971, and Alaska, how many of you knew that Alaska has a dividend where now everyone in the state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked? Yeah, if you move to Alaska the next year, you'll get between $1,000 and $2,000 a head. So if you have a family of four, it'd be like $8,000 or so. And then some of you were like, that's still not enough for me to move to Alaska, which is probably correct. But how does Alaska pay for it? They pay for it with oil money, petroleum dividend. And what I'm asking people here in Iowa and around the country, what is the oil of the 21st century?
Technology.
Technology, AI, robots, data, self-driving cars and trucks. Our data is now worth more than oil. How many of you got a data check in the mail last month? None of us. Where did the data checks go? Amazon, Google, Facebook, they're getting the data checks. You think it's free, it's not free. And don't worry, like I interact with it the same way you all do. It's like none of us actually reads that crazy I agree, I consent form, right? You just like scroll down and hit agree and then you hope for the best, hope nothing too bad happens. And then part of me is like, well, it's free, how bad could it be? But then it turns out that they're now profiting to the tune of billions and tens of billions of dollars off of our data, and we're not seeing a dime. So people are concerned about the effect on our democracy, which is a very legit concern. But I'm actually concerned about something more fundamental, which is just human agency and decision making. Because you might think you're making a decision, but it could be that there have been 1,000 digital breadcrumbs that have like led you to that decision. And sometimes it's something very benign, like what's the next video you watch on YouTube, and you're like, who cares? But sometimes it could be something much more fundamental than that, like what political candidate you support, or something along those lines. So we have to make it so that our data is ours, even if we decide to loan it to the tech companies. If they profit from it, we profit too. And this is one way you start funding this $1,000 a month. for each of us. This is like a new right of citizenship. And because it's universal and fair, everyone can get behind it. In America today, everything revolves around the almighty dollar. And many of the other candidates are saying we have to combat the corruption and influence. They are generally correct. But the fastest way we can start making America work for us, for more of us, is by putting more dollars into our hands. That's actually the quickest, most effective way to make it so that you can look at your daughter and not be stressed out about her future, that you can start improving your own way of life. This is something that we can make happen collectively, immediately. There's nothing stopping the majority of citizens of a democracy from declaring ourselves a dividend. It happened in Alaska. It's been in effect for almost 40 years. It can happen right here in the United States of America. And I'm going to argue it must happen here in the United States of America because we're going through the greatest economic transformation in our country's history. Self-driving trucks, you all are experienced and savvy enough to know what self-driving trucks are going to mean for thousands of communities around the country. And you know. A lot of the pointy heads I talk to don't know. You all know. So we have to make a move like the dividend as quickly as possible before the self-driving trucks start actually displacing tens of thousands of truckers. And that date is only 5 to 10 years away. The self-driving trucks are already on the highways. I've been to Iowa 80, the truck stop. I'm sure you go there quite frequently because the buffet is a very good value. You can go and make a beeline. The variety for the money, very strong. 5,000 people stop at Iowa 80 every day. What happens when the robot trucks don't need to stop for a meal, or a shower, or a bed? And then think about all the Iowa 80s throughout the country. Do you trust the government to figure that out? The fastest way we can make it work is just by distributing the gains from the 21st century economy into our people's hands so that clerk at that food stand at Iowa 80 can start making adjustments. We can't rely upon the government to figure out all the adjustments that we need to make, but we can count on the government to send large numbers of checks to large numbers of Americans promptly and reliably. That's one of our government's core competencies. We have to lean into that and then enable us to solve our own problems and improve our own lives. That was a more robust explanation of $1,000 a month. I quite enjoyed it. Thank you all for your service. Thank you so much. We're going to make history together in 2020. Thank you. I know you don't want to be singled out, David, but thank you so much for putting this together. It was an act of service, and I appreciate it a great deal. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed. And remember, we're trying to raise $20 million for Andrew Yang in Q4. So donate below using our Secure Act Blue link.
Put the money in our hands. Put the money in our hands. Put the money in our hands. Can we afford it? Yes. Will it cause inflation? No. Is it awesome? Yes. Is anyone trying to make it happen? Yeah, that guy.